In 3, 2, 1.
Good morning. Welcome to the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session for Thursday, February 18th, 2021. It is 9:01 a.m. My name is Ty Mentzer, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. We've got Vice Chair Commissioner Gary Edwards participating virtually, Thurston County Manager Ramiro Chavez, Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, Commissioner Mejia also, Commissioner Carolina Mejia also participating through Zoom. Joshua Cummings, head of our Community Planning and Economic Development Department, as well as Jennifer Davis and Maya Teeple, part of his team there at CPED. And today's topic is the 2021-22 official docket update. For public attendance, you may follow along on Thurston County YouTube channel or join by conference call at 360-252-9020. The pin is 1234. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to County Manager.
Thank you, and good morning, all of you. So this is the beginning of the conversation related to the official docket. The board has approved, and perhaps is in the process, or will be approving, if that is the case, coming up. This is the mid-cycle check-in. There is the board approved a development code docket back in early 2020, which included 2020 and 2021. The staff is going to walk you through the process of both the comp plan docket as well as the development code docket. And also, I believe staff is going to give you a status update as to some of the elements the staff have completed over the last year. And during that conversation, at the end, we'll have perhaps two paths the board may consider. Continue with the list for the staff to continue to work on that list the board approved last year. Or perhaps you may want to add additional items that you would like staff to work and add it into the docket. So within the two paths is a little bit different steps that we need to take. So, and we will get to that point as to what the steps are depending on the path the board wants to take on this. So that's and again, the beginning of the conversation. So maybe at the end of this meeting, we would like to hear at least, not necessarily a decision, perhaps a direction as to what path you want to take in terms of continue on with the list or maybe adding additional items to the docket. Josh?
Great. Thank you, County Manager. Yes, that's a great setup. And as the County Manager said, this is the mid-cycle docket review for both the comprehensive and development code dockets, docket year 2020, 2021. And that's a kind of an important piece. It's a 2-year cycle with this mid-year check-in to adjust if the commissioners so choose. And I want to kind of take back just a little bit to how we got here. And there's two really important things for the commissioners to recall. Two big changes that were made in the past couple of years related directly to the process that Jennifer Davis has implemented in this discussion so that the board can see clearly what the topics are and the amount of time that goes into them and the amount of staff level that goes into them. So you can equate the number of items with the number of staff, the humans that actually exist to do the work. And then the board, the second big piece of the update, has been the very clear direction that the Board of County Commissioners provides on topics that we should be engaging in, and then the prioritization. So without those two updates, we wouldn't have been able to have the big successes that we've had over the past couple of years, clearing through the backlog of items that have been stacking up for 5 or 7 years even. So just wanted to provide that context in terms of the successes of where we were and now where we are. And we're still working out this process. This is the first mid-cycle review that Jennifer Davis and her team have done with this board, obviously. And so, like the county manager said, this is that opportunity to look at what the previous board decided was important and then how they prioritized, think about the successes that we already have, and then make sure that we're on the right path. So this is that conversation. Just wanted to provide some of that history. Any questions before Jennifer jumps in, and Jennifer and Maya, and they get their PowerPoint up?
Yes, I have. Can you hear me okay, Josh?
Yep. Yes, sir.
But I don't know. I don't want to jump in on the chair if we've.
Go ahead, Commissioner Edwards. You got the floor.
Okay. I guess my concern as we move forward here today, just in this couple hours, is to make sure that we have time to ask questions as we go through different segments of this, so that we don't have to write them all down and wait until the end. Are we going to be able to accommodate that? I just think we get better questions because we're talking about a topic at that point in time. And the other thing is, I looked through the paperwork that was submitted for us to review prior to this meeting, and I see in here that there are issues that talk about staff time and such, but there's nothing mentioned about the possibility that we could utilize outside professionals to help deal with some of these requests that we get. Do you have anything like that in here that we're going to be referring to, or maybe this is the wrong time to question that?
No, thank you, Commissioner. So to answer your first question, we'll go through the process by which we're discussing today, just so that there's an overview of what the comprehensive plan and the development code docket, what those two dockets are. And then this packet that you all have, this paper packet you guys have, I think, a notebook, is the process improvement where every single topic has a one-pager. And as we've done in the past, we'll go through that one-pager. And if there is questions that the commissioners would like to ask during that time, I'm sure Jennifer and Maya could entertain them. And then in terms of whether or not outside consultants are part of the conversation, just like we've done in the past, we'll entertain that discussion with the Board of County Commissioners and take your direction.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Ready to bring it up, Jennifer?
Do you have anything up front?
I'm sorry, I missed. Were you asking me the question or someone else, Commissioner?
Commissioner Mejia.
Mejia.
Thank you.
No questions for me. Thank you.
Go right ahead, Jennifer.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and get rolling here, since I know you will have lots of questions, which I'm happy about.
Just hold on. We're in a slightly different format with all the commissioners virtual, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Edwards and Mejia to I can't see you obviously or hear you or anything of the nature. So we're just going to have to have you just pipe up when you have a question, and we'll just manage that appropriately. But go ahead and pipe up with you the point at which you have a question.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. So Jennifer Davis, Community Planning Manager, and I'm here with Maya Teeple, our Senior Planner who manages our Growth Management Services section of our Community Planning Division. And this is a big body of work that two of you are quite familiar with, but I want to spend enough time up front to make sure Commissioner Mejia is familiar with this body of work and what this is all about. So again, this is a mid-cycle check-in on what is called our dockets. Our dockets are basically all of our work that we do in Thurston County related to the Growth Management Act. So that relates to our comprehensive plans, sub-area plans, joint plans, and the development codes that implement the policies that are in those plans. The plans are the vision for how the county is growing in the future and balancing all of those things that come with growth, infrastructure, where people are going to live, how we're going to protect the environment and public health. And the development regulations are what implements those through the Thurston County Code. And so we actually have two dockets that the board adopted back in April 2020 that we're in the middle of working on, and they contain all of the potential amendments to either the plans or the development code. So just to orient you to, everyone got a binder or a packet. And I'm going to orient you to what's in there and then provide a little bit of an overview of the docketing process. So we're all caught up on that. Check in on where we are with the current work provide an overview of new items, and then talk about the next steps, as the county manager suggested. So firstly, your binder. Right off the bat, when you open it, there is a sort of a cheat sheet. It's called Attachment B, Active Docketed Projects, Priorities, and Timing. And that is where we've listed all of the things we're working on currently. Thank you, Josh. Josh is our visual aid as well. It includes the priority that the board established for the item last year. It includes the estimated FTE time that's spent assigned to that docket item. Those are estimates. Some of these things can be unpredictable as they go through the adoption process, and we'll talk about that. And then the planned completion date for each item. And the good news is, when you look at that cheat sheet, most of the items will be completed by the end of 2021, if all goes well. Some of these items are bigger ticket items, which we're going to talk about a little later, and it's unlikely they'll be completed in 2021, may have to go over into 2022. And so I want to be very upfront and clear about that, and those are listed out. Continuing with the binder orientation, tab 1 contains the comprehensive plan amendment docket. So those are all the proposed amendments to our comprehensive plan and joint plans and sub-area plans. We've updated the official docket you adopted last year to cross out all of the things that have been completed and then highlight some things that are either new or still hanging out on a to-do list, which is our preliminary docket. And then following that cover sheet are project sheets for all the individual projects, which if you want more information on any specific project, we've provided it in sort of a quick form that includes where the idea came from, what the request is all about, where it applies in the county, and where we are in the process. Tab 2 includes all that same stuff, but for the development code. So we maintain these two separate dockets because we're required to under the Growth Management Act. Also, it's a good practice because comprehensive plan amendments are really about policy and land use and big picture issues, and development code amendments are, and comprehensive plan amendments, we can only actually do an adoption for once per year. That's usually in December. Development code amendments are kind of constantly rolling through and can be adopted anytime throughout the year. They're maintained on a separate list. Again, that list is in tab 2 with project sheets on each item following. All of the white project sheets are the stuff we currently are working on that are on the adopted official dockets, and there are peppered through some bright green project sheets, and those are new items or items that have not yet been docketed by the board, and so we're going to cover those later in the presentation. And then tab 3, just to complete the orientation of the binder, is your reference guide to how a bill becomes a law in Thurston County. It's going through the steps of both docketing and then the entire legislative process for how these things come to through our public review process to your adoption. So again, like we said, the goal of today's briefing is actually very straightforward: give you an overview and a status update on where we are with items, review new proposals that have come in over the past year. Even though we set a 2-year docket, we still left open the opportunity for the public to apply for new items, new proposals. And so we accepted those, and we got a few this past year that we want to go over for you. Again, the board does not need to take any action in order for us to just keep working on all of the officially docketed items. If the board did want to add one or more of the new proposals, then there is a step we need to take, which is to hold a written public comment period, followed by a follow-up briefing, and then actual action by the board to amend the official dockets. And we'll talk about those in more detail toward the end. Any questions so far just about the orientation of the binder and the goal of the briefing?
Jennifer, can we go through how a bill becomes a law real quickly?
We are going to. Josh, that's the next slide.
Excellent.
All right. Well, I'm just going to keep going. I will pause periodically to check for questions. So the steps to docketing. So this first page, which is the first page in your tab 3, but also it's up on the screen. So there are several steps just for docketing an amendment proposal. Everything that comes in, whether it be an idea from a commissioner, whether it be an application from the public, a change in the law that's requiring us to make a change to our plans or our codes, all of those ideas get put on what's called a preliminary docket. And then we annually or biannually bring that preliminary docket to the board for review. And then the board holds a 20-day written comment period for anything new. And we make that available to the public, and they get to provide whatever their thoughts are on whether or not the board should pursue this particular idea to amend the code or the plan. The board reviews those written comments. We have a work session, and the board gives direction ultimately on whether to put the idea on the official docket. That doesn't mean you've adopted the idea. That doesn't mean you've made the change. That just means you're putting it on the docket and you're saying, staff, please assign someone to work on this. And then you also have an opportunity to give that item a priority so that staff has good direction on whether this is something you want done first or last in the list of items. And then we actually go through a publishing process where we formally adopt the docket and we publish it and make it available to the public on our website. So all of this is about transparency to the public, and to ensure there is something called early and continuous public participation, which is a requirement under the Growth Management Act and is codified in Thurston County Code. So all of this is following a very stepwise process, which is spelled on this sheet of paper. Are there any questions about this piece of docketing? Okay, hearing none. Once things are on the official docket, we do what we're in the middle of doing now for all of the items that were docketed by the board last year, which is staff will review those code amendments, do legal review, prepare our analysis, prepare reports, develop any alternatives or options, and bring all of that to our planning commission. So your planning commission spends a lot of time on all of the items on the docket. They hold several work sessions. All of their meetings are open to the public, and then ultimately they hold a public hearing. That's step 3 in the middle of this sheet. After that public hearing, they have additional deliberations. Sometimes this process can take just a few meetings. Sometimes this process can take a year or more, depending on the how large the issue is and how much public interest there is in an issue. That really determines a lot of the length of time each particular item takes. And then the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, a written recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. During this time, staff also conducts the required State Environmental Policy Act, or CPED, review, and provides notification to the Department of Commerce, which is required, that the county is considering making an amendment to either its code or comprehensive plan. Any questions about that Planning Commission process? All right, hearing none, this is the one you're familiar with because we've been through this quite a few times last year, where you are provided as the board the Planning Commission recommendation. Staff holds board briefings and work sessions to go over the Planning Commission recommendation, what the proposal is all about, public comments that have been received to date. And then the board has discretion to make adjustments at this time. You can add options, you can tweak language. The board has a lot of discretion throughout this process. This is a policy-making process. You are the policymakers. And so while you're listening to the advice of the Planning Commission and the input from the public and the input from staff, ultimately the decisions are those of the board. Then the board holds a public hearing. After that, we have usually follow-up briefings. Sometimes there's action that the board can take at the close of its public hearing if it's a very minor or relatively straightforward code amendment. More often than not, though, we'll have a follow-up briefing or work session with the board. Staff will develop the adopting ordinance. It requires legal review by our prosecuting attorney's office, and we bring it back to the board for adoption. Throughout all of this, there are multiple ways that we provide the public information about how to engage in the process. For bigger projects, we have open houses. Lately, they've been virtual or online open houses. We provide legal notice in newspapers of record, as well as other local papers if there are issues that we should advertise, say in the Nisqually Valley News or the Centralia papers. And we maintain project pages on our website. After adoption by the board, which is the last step, we're not quite done. There is an automatic 60-day appeal period under the Growth Management Act. And so we publish a notice of adoption and we send our notice to the Department of Commerce. And then while we can begin implementing the change, there is always the possibility that within that 60-day appeal period, we would get an appeal from really anyone who is standing through the process. And then we'll have to respond to that. And that has happened over the time. And we're actually in the middle of responding to one right now having to do with our agricultural lands designations. But I think that project's going very well. Any questions about this process?
Can I jump in real quick, Jennifer?
Sure.
So these 3 steps that Jennifer just went over, well, she's got them very well organized and they look neat and pretty concise and clear. This is, as they colloquially say, this is where the sausage is made, and it's difficult. And the facilitation process can go back and forth and take time. And this is really the transparency where the public gets an opportunity to put their information in. And when we're talking about what gets done, this is the part that needs to have an unconnected party to help facilitate the process to allow for all public comment to be provided. So the question has been raised in the past, can we hire outside consultants? Can the applicant hire a consultant to do the work? There are multiple pieces of the work, and there's the work that's the policy, the application part of it, but then there's also the process part of it. And the process part of it is what Jennifer just went through, steps 1 through 3. So just wanted to make sure that that kind of was in your mind, that even though it looks really nice and tidy, this is a complicated and sometimes winding process depending upon the input from the public.
No truer words were spoken. Go ahead.
So did you see my hand go up? I'm trying.
Yeah.
Okay. As we go through this, I've always thought, especially for the public, to have a sense of the time frame. If you were to put on each one, like the first page, general docket process steps, then your second page, and then your third page. If you had a time frame there somehow, I know each one of these is so different, but an example would be maybe if we went to the first preliminary docket review, that would be attachment C, page 1. If we could have a time frame so that we as individual commissioners, when we get asked, would know, well, this step takes from 30 days to 6 months. I don't know the answer to those questions, but I think it would allow the public to have a little better understanding of why does the process take so long. And, basically we're following the Growth Management Act is what we're doing. And then it would not only educate us as individual commissioners, but it would give us the answers when we get asked, well, boy, you're right now, you're in the development final official docket stage, and that could take 3 months, or I don't know what a minimum time is, but I suppose if we're going to set a hearing, wait 20 days for the hearing, and then we're going to do the things that come after that. I mean, we're talking, when I say this, any example you might pick could be, 90 days out before we even move to the next step on here. And I take it that we go through each one of these steps in basically a chronological order if you had them numbered. So just to comment, but is that feasible, or does it make sense? Or
it definitely makes sense. The feasibility gets tricky when you talk about different types of projects. But I will say that the docketing process itself, it can take a long time depending on how long it takes the board to make a determination that the project that comes in the door as a citizen application or anything else, that deliberation time to decide whether you're ready to put it on the official docket can take several years in some cases. There are items, and we went through a lot of these last April, that had been on our preliminary docket for many years because they had never risen to a priority level for the board to put it on the official docket. Once things are on the official docket, that can take a few weeks, that actual adoption of the docket process. But once things are on that docket, it depends on the order of priority how long an item's going to take. So we only have a limited number of staff that can only handle a certain number of projects at a time, and your planning commission can only handle a certain number of projects at the same time. So we basically follow the priority set by the board, and that determines when those items will first come before the planning commission. And then I'm not gonna say all bets are off, but it gets to be a matter of how long the planning commission is going to take on an item and what the level of public interest is. For very straightforward code amendments where there have been a lot of research and preliminary work done, it can be 6 months from the beginning of planning commission review to board adoption. For more complex amendments or items that take a lot more public outreach, deliberation, they're controversial, that could take a year to multiple years to get through the entire adoption process. So while we do follow a step-by-step process, and there are pieces of time that we can say, yes, we have a 20-day notice before a public hearing, and yes, we usually take about 3 work sessions, and so it's this much time. It's really hard to put a time frame to each step on all of these pages, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. I know it's complicated, but I'll refer back to something we did the other day, and that had to do with childcare. Just as an example, I picked up. I mean, I think we were first notified about a concern about child care maybe back in 2004, and I just find it hard to believe, and it's hard for me to explain to citizens that, well, I guess county government didn't care about your child care problem or something. I mean, I'm not saying that's the case, but when it lingers for so long, I'd like to have some kind of an explanation that, well, here's an example. That one went on for 16 years until it made it high enough, which again, I don't really understand. I just think that sometimes maybe a citizen's priority probably is nowhere near the priority of the governing body. And maybe that's why it gets left. But I don't know that that's the true answer. And I'm not a planner, although I did go to the planning for dummies or something that Commerce put on some time back, and I'd recommend it for anybody to go to.
That's a good course.
Okay, well, anyway, that's just I'm just trying to figure out so I can be more responsive to the public when I get questions. And I don't know if my seatmates are worried about those kind of things exactly the same as I am. I know it took me a long time to figure it out to where we're at today, even. So thank you for listening.
A couple of things. So I see you, Josh, there. For one, Commissioner Edwards, you raised your hand on the participant list, and we've never had a meeting where we've been in this format. So if that works for you, I can monitor that and call on you. And that's a very orderly way to do it. We've just never had to do it that way. I wanted to ask Commissioner Mejia, are you able to use the raise hand function?
Yes, I just saw it pop up.
Okay, very good. Then we can do things that way, and I can just watch that. Yeah, I get where Commissioner Edwards is coming from. I guess my concern is, if we were going to do that, I'd want it to be limited to those steps where there is a kind of a typical time frame. because I don't want to create expectation. You know, there are areas where we have a board has a latitude, and we want to keep that latitude, and I don't want to create unreasonable expectations in the public that, hey, you file this thing and we're gonna put you on the preliminary docket, you know, within 6 months. Well, sometimes there's reasons why things stay on the preliminary docket. I mean, I know Commissioner Edwards is thinking about, I think, the citizen, you know, that we want to be responsive to, but let's say it's the state that wanted to do, let's say it's the Maple Lane thing. Let's say they had a really good idea, not a prison, but a better idea. And it's a huge project and we don't have capacity, and it's something we want to keep, you know, thinking about for the long term, but we're not there yet. And there may be every reason in the world why we want to keep that on a preliminary docket for several years. And it doesn't mean we're not responsive or we don't care. It's just a juggling of our staff limited resources and priorities, and the board we want to work on the citizen stuff. We don't really care about the state of Washington's project right now. So we want to have that latitude, and I don't want to create the expectation by putting it in black and white that you're going to get X step done in X number of days or months, because that's just not the reality of this, a very fluid and flexible process. So that's my 2 cents on that. But Josh, you had something.
Commissioner, I think you covered it very well. That's exactly right. So where we can put the time frame in these steps, we have, and where the board has requested to maintain flexibility, that's exactly why we don't have timeframes on there, because each one of these is kind of a case-by-case scenario. So it's like, you know, it takes a certain amount of time to get your air pressure filled in your tires or change your transmission. Those are two completely different processes. Sorry. And so making sure that we provide the board that flexibility in terms of timing is exactly right on. And I'd also highlight that Commissioner Edwards is pointing out very, I think, adeptly, the Board of County Commissioners put CPED and other groups in the county through the lean training process over the past few years. And if you're interested in how we got to this level of transparency and prioritization, that lean training is what really impacted the way that we provide this information to the Board of County Commissioners. Previous boards didn't quite have this same level of process and transparency to make the decisions to prioritize. So when you're, as I talked about at the very beginning of the presentation, when you're talking to citizens and they're asking, how come this isn't done yet or this isn't done, these single page sheets that we're going through in a bit here, those are exactly where these determinations are made by the commissioners. So we've increased the process clarity and transparency, and that prioritization is exactly where the board provides their really helpful input, if that adds any help with that conversation.
Yes, that's good.
Commissioner Edwards, your hand is still up. Did you have another comment?
Okay, I was just going to say that's, I'm sorry I didn't put my hand down, but I did have one other thing to say. We'll get it figured out as we go along here, I guess. I think that's right, Josh, and it just takes a long time to get this pinned down. I have to say, I sympathize with both the chair and Commissioner Mejia, because this is complicated stuff, and to stay on top of it, I'm trying to get myself educated a little more as we move forward, but I'm also sympathetic to what they need to have answers for as time goes on, facing their constituents as well that might be asking questions. So no, that was good. I'm not asking for anything specific. I would like to know just some general timeframes, and maybe we can sit down and go on one-on-one sometime. So, because this is obviously, we're a half hour into this and we haven't made it very far into it yet. So it's pretty complicated, and it's not good to rush it maybe. So thanks. And I'll take my hand down.
Okay, thanks, sir. Go ahead, Jennifer.
So I think we've covered this. So just, we do this complicated, lengthy process for transparency, to communicate with the public, to communicate with the board, to allow the board to have the discretion that they have on what the work priorities are for CPED and the county for comprehensive planning and the development code amendments. It helps build our work plan. So planning staff do not control the priorities of this work. That's controlled by the board. So our job is to facilitate the process, to bring you all of the ideas and proposals. You set the priorities and we assign staff to them in kind. That's how the timing works out. If anyone ever had a question on where we are in a given point in time on any project on this list, staff's available to answer those questions. The binder has that information for you as well. And especially that first sheet, attachment B, gives you that planned completion date. So you can be looking at that to help you answer constituent questions about where we are on something. But those priorities are set by the board, not by staff. So the ideas also come from sometimes the board. The board may have a policy initiative or a high priority project they've heard from their constituents that they'd like to put on the docket. And that will be added through this docketing process. We allow every year for citizens to submit applications for proposals to the docket for comprehensive plan amendments. We have a pretty lengthy, those are usually land use changes and rezoning. So that's a pretty lengthy application, environmental checklist, and there are fees charged for those. Development code amendments, folks can also submit proposals for development code amendments. We saw that with the resorts and retreats amendments you were recently briefed on, and the commercial smokehouses amendment you were recently briefed on and set hearings for. Those were both citizen initiated development code proposals, which is why we said, the Johnson proposal or the Cascade proposal, even though any development code proposal will apply to more than just that one applicant. We do have individual applicants who submit applications to change parts of our code. And in fact, one of our applications we're going to go over a little bit later comes from a citizen for the code. You also have staff, and go ahead.
Commissioner Edwards had a hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. The reason I had my hand up is some of the graphics that you're using are not in my packet, and that's fine because I can see them. But when you make reference to them, can you maybe give a page number or say this is just a graphic? It's not maybe in your booklet.
So I think you got a printout of this PowerPoint, and I'm just going through the PowerPoint. So right now I'm on page 8 of the PowerPoint presentation, if you're following along.
Okay, well, possibly I didn't get a printout. I'm just using the book that we were given. So, okay, yeah. That's fine. I can see it there. I mean, okay. I'm good with it. I just, I always like to know page numbers as you're going through something. It just makes it quicker for me to get to it. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that.
Right. PowerPoint is not in the binder. That's what I think the confusion.
Okay, so
we'll make copies of the PowerPoint. Yeah, it's not included in the binder.
Yeah, I printed mine, so you don't need to make one for me.
Okay.
I need one, please.
Okay.
We'll make copies.
All right. The third place that proposal idea can come from is from staff, because as staff implements the codes, this is usually our code amendment proposals, we find corrections that are needed, updated references to different state laws or cross references in the code. There may be consistency issues, and staff will, usually we have sort of a running list of those changes that we need to update, and we bring those forward to the board as well. And then there are legally required updates, and these can be significant. Every year, the Growth Management Act is the subject of a lot of attention through the state legislative process. There are many bills this year, and there usually are, that are attempting to change portions of the Growth Management Act that have a direct impact on our work at Thurston County, and may add requirements that we must adjust either our plans and or our codes to meet. And so those are brought forward to the board as well to be added to the docket. So those are basically the 4 places that new ideas or proposals to amend our plans and codes come from. Any questions about that?
Nope.
Okay, and so the options before the board, I just want to review these really quickly, and we'll review them at the end again. But we have adopted an official 2020-2021 docket for both the comprehensive plan and the development code. And the board needs to do 0 for us to continue to work on those officially docketed items. And then that means that any new items that have come in or items that may still be lingering on the preliminary docket will be revisited again with you in early 2022. And you'll have an opportunity to put those on the official docket at that time. Option 2 is once you hear about the new proposals that are coming forward, you can make a decision hopefully today to provide direction to consider adding those to the official dockets, which would require and trigger a 20-day comment period, not a public hearing, just a written comment period that we would advertise, and we would give information about the proposed items to the public and allow them to comment to the board, so you have that input before you make a decision on whether or not to put it on the work list. I want to remind you at this time that there are staff capacity issues involved with that. We have staff tasked to everything on the docket, and we have an anticipated timeline to complete those items. We have a little more work than we have staff. That's not unusual, especially since I think last year with our process improvements, we really threw everything we had onto the official docket to try to really clear the books. And so we have a pretty long list of projects. And so we're a little over what we have staff capacity to complete within the 2021 year timeframe. So some of those items will go into 2022. So any new items added, we'll just be having to have that frame of reference and think about where they would fall on the priority list, and if you wanted to shift priorities from existing work that staff is engaged in. So these were the items that we completed in 2020. There were 29 docketed items on the 2 dockets. We completed 7 in 2020. That may sound like only 7, but these were some big items, including finishing up our major comprehensive plan update, including mineral lands designation, public health chapter update, parks chapter update. We did our annual update to the capital improvement program. We completely updated and rewrote the Rochester sub-area plan, amended the Nisqually plan to allow for recycled asphalt processing. And we did several code amendments, including rural accessory dwelling units, which had a lot of public interest, and was something that we were happy to complete after, I think, actually many years of that project being on the dockets at various priority levels. So these are our successes for 2020, and we feel pretty good about those. There's a lot left.
Jennifer,
Go ahead.
Commissioner Mincer, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I recall, when you first came on the board, you asked Jennifer, what's a standard amount of items to get done in a year? And I think her reply was 3 to 4. So looking at this 7 says to me that Jennifer's team has done a great job, and that, again, that direction and prioritization from the board has led us to this 7 as opposed to 3 or 4 completed in a year. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, and that's in the face of the board, basically. As Jennifer said, we ignored that, basically, ignored that caution and piled a lot of stuff on the docket because A, they were important things, and B, some of them been around a long time, and we just wanted to get them moving. So, that combined with this success, I'm very pleased by where we're at, and I think we're moving in a really solid direction. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you. And so, first of all, 29 minus 7 isn't 24, but that's because we have some items that roll on year to year. But we have 24 docketed items on the official docket left. And again, they probably can't all be finished in 2021. There are some big ticket items I'm on page 12 of the PowerPoint, if you're following along or have it with you. We have big ticket items that are a big review of our agricultural lands, policies, and programs. We have our shoreline master program major update, which includes a whole update of the 1990 Shoreline Master Program, and this is a requirement under state law, and also updating the pieces of our other codes that refer to that Shoreline Master Program. We have a major update to the Grand Mound subarea plan, and there are several rezones that are going to be processed along with that. There's also requests for expansion of the Grand Mound subarea that will have to be processed and taken to our regional TRPC urban growth subcommittee to look at. And then we have our joint plans that we need to update with the cities that govern the urban growth areas. And these have been around for a while and needing to be worked on for a long time. And we finally have staff, and we're working on those. So we feel really good about the progress there, but that's going to take some time. And some of those joint plans will roll over into 2022 just because they're pretty big. Those items will take up the bulk of staff time. They will have the most public comment, and they will take the most time at the planning commission review level. And some of that's a little unpredictable, but we are committed to efficiently following the priorities of the board and taking these through as quickly as we can, but also keeping an eye on the fact we need to do good public outreach and notification, and the ability for the public to engage on some of these projects is high. So I've already said adding new proposals to this list will probably mean revisiting some priorities. So here's a status update on all the officially docketed items all in one list. This is everything we're working on all on the screen. This is page 13 of the PowerPoint. You have individual project sheets on each of these items in your binders. After I go through this slide, I'll pause, and if there are any questions on any of these individual projects, that's the time to ask those. The three that are highlighted on this screen, the child care centers, resorts and retreats, and commercial smokehouses, those will be finished hopefully this quarter. You've just set a public hearing for those, and so those will be scratched off the list very soon, which is good, and then we can turn our attention to some other items on the priority list. So any questions about any of these particular items from the docket? And you can refer to your project sheets. If you have trouble finding the project sheet, let me know and I can look it up for you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Edwards.
I guess when you say any questions, I mean, is this the time to ask kind of where we're at on any particular one? And
Yeah,
okay.
So you can see where again, attachment B in your binder, that cheat sheet of active docketed projects, that'll tell you kind of where we are at a quick glance on each of these items and what our planned completion date is and what priority level they are. And then you can find more details about it on the individual project sheet that's contained in your binder.
Okay, let me just ask, because I know this has been, hanging fire for quite some time, is the Barnett property down by Tenino. And that was a cluster issue. I think he put in for it in 16.
Right.
And we've charged him some money. I want to say, I don't know, under $10,000 or something. I really don't know off the top of my head. But what has he gotten for his donation or for his request? I don't know. Like, how far along are we? Is that still something we're doing, or is that one a good example of where the applicant maybe should hire an out of the house professional that knows all the rules? I'm told that many jurisdictions utilize those type of people to get things done, especially when we're trying to do other things, especially those maybe mandated by the state or that are required that we do, that we couldn't, say, charge a citizen for, obviously, where we could actually maybe farm that out to a professional. And I guess I'm told they follow all the rules of growth management and make it all work, and somehow seem to follow the same guidelines that you've laid out here in your step chart. I guess that's the best way I can refer to that. Is that something feasible? And I guess where are we at on that one? So you gave me the latitude to ask the question.
Yeah,
So,
that's why we're here.
okay.
Here's where
But
we're at.
I don't want to tie everybody else up too, but go ahead.
No, now's the time to ask those questions. So again, this is priority number 3 of 5 citizen requests. So staff has been working through a couple other citizen requests ahead of this one, but we do have staff working on Mr. Barnett's proposal to change our cluster development policy and related code. It's described in tab 1 on page 16 is the project sheet. And we do have staff assigned, and we do anticipate this amendment to be completed by the end of 2021. So we are working on it. As far as folks hiring consultants, we often have consultants who are the applicants or working on behalf of applicants who do a lot of work to provide us with either sample code language or exactly what they want to see at the outcome of their application. Again, for comprehensive plan amendments, land use changes, major policy amendments, we do charge fees for those. We do not charge fees for development code amendment applications. And the work is done primarily in-house, but applicants will often provide a lot of information up front to help kind of facilitate that process. It's really a determination of the board about whether additional outside help would want to be hired for any of this work. Right now, we do have staff assigned to that project and for everything on this list. It's just a matter of working through the process as we've spelled out to get to adoption and handling all the public comment and input that we're going to get. There's going to be significant legal review also involved in this particular Mr. Barnett's cluster policy and code change amendment, just because it has to do with the size of cluster developments in the rural area. And there has been case law around that. And there have been choices made in the past by the board about limiting that size. But I know there's a lot of interest in cluster development in Thurston County. So we're going to look at all of that and do the appropriate level of legal review to make sure we're staying within the bounds of growth management and can give you something that you can be confident about adopting at the end of the day.
Okay, I take it I'm just trying not to cut you off, but in this particular case, how would that applicant request that he be allowed to hire someone? I mean, I know he's quite frustrated because he doesn't look like he's getting much for his initial application fee. Is there a process in place that he could put in to you folks, and then maybe you would bring it to the county commissioners level so that we could make a determination on allowing a private group? And I'm gonna I see the Pantier group is involved in that with him, and I know they have professionals on staff that can do what we don't seem to be able to do. So what's the process for them to bring that issue forward and make a request? Just do I get a call on the phone and it's real informal and I put it on the docket, or do they fill out a form and get a hold of you, or how's that happen?
So Commissioner, let me jump in real quick here. What you're describing is exactly what we're relaying, that the process improvements and the transparency that we put into place, if you look at page 16 and 17 of 62 in your binder, it provides you a very specific update on the Barnett cluster request and a completion time of this year. So you're asking exactly what we're describing, and thank you for highlighting that, because this is exactly what we've been trying to relay, so thank you. But if you look at 16 and 17 of 62, that provides you the answers to your question in terms of timing. And it is moving forward. And as we've discussed previously, we have been working through a large backlog, understand the frustration of many of our applicants that got caught before we were able to improve our process, but now we're working through that. And so there's your update on that portion. I'd encourage you to take a look at that, and then maybe we can have questions. But you're right on in terms of, we've got another hour left of this briefing, and it's exactly for these questions that you're asking on each one of these projects. So you're on target. Appreciate it.
Okay, but so still, if he wanted to go faster, too bad. We can't do that. Is that what I'm hearing? Or yes, if he wanted to get it done faster, he could assist through some professional, kind of like what something was done down at Lakeside. I don't know. They paid for certain work to be done. That's all I know.
So we have prioritized this item as number 3 per the board's direction. And as we've discussed, the timing of the facilitation is directly related to the amount of input from the public and the level of transparency and questions that happen. So as you pointed out, this applicant has hired Pantier to provide input on the policy work, and then we do the facilitation process, which is dependent upon the back and forth with the Planning Commission and input requested from the Board of County Commissioners and the prioritization. So in terms of faster, you, the board, has the authority to change your level of prioritization on any of these items.
Okay.
I don't have a blue hand because I'm the host of the Zoom meeting. Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, Mayor.
I'm going to state similar comments they have stated in the past when the board has reviewed the comments, the docket items. And the conversation of consultants has been consistent in bringing it up to this conversation. And there is an opportunity, I believe, any citizen can hire a consultant to help us go through a specific reports in a way. That's how Lakeside did. But also, my comment that has been in the last couple of years is a balance. It is a balance because a citizens initiative, development code docket cannot be driven by a consultant individually because we need to strike a balance that we cannot be lopsided on this. And that is the obligation that we have to you, to the board, that we need to bring an objective approach, an objective review to make sure the public has the opportunity to review any type of proposals. And that is the balance, because if it's a citizens initiative proposal, that all the work is done by a consultant, hired by the proponent, I don't think it's going to be a valid process that you're going to be able to make a decision at the end. So that is the balance, I believe, that we continue to go through this process, because we need to remain objective, and we need to remain objective for the other members of the public to provide a perspective. And that is the balance in terms of bringing consultants. There is an opportunity, but it is not a wholesale approach that I see, where a consultant can do all the work working for the person who submitted a request to change a particular land use. They perhaps benefit that individual specifically. So my 2 cents.
Okay, can I follow up on that real quick? Romero, you said we cannot do that. And, we cannot have it be driven by the consultant or whomever. Is there an RCW that says that? Or could we make that decision that, well, yes, we could, to get things moving? Because it's my estimation that when that happens in other jurisdictions that I've been talking with, and they tell me they follow the growth management code and that step system completely, the same as our own staff does it. It's just that they don't seem to have to fight the shortage of staff, I guess is the best way to put it. Well, so is there a law that says you cannot do this, or is it just your position that we should not?
This is my observation, Commissioner. There is not, as far as I know, there is not a law preventing any consultant to provide, services. As I stated, I believe staff's obligation is to provide an objective approach to you, the board, an objective process in which all the public feels that in fact is objective. that in fact that is broad in the scope and is broad in policy, they feel the public outside from the proponent to provide specific comments to you before you make a decision. So I'm not here to say you're prevented by law. So that's not the point that I'm trying to make. I am not going to get down the road of the laws preventing you to do anything. This is just my objective observation, as I have stated in the past when this conversation has occurred. It's just to make sure that the process itself is objective. And at the end, that objectivity is where you require from staff, you as a board.
I would just add that, I mean, the mayor's concern is valid, but aside from just the objectivity, even if the consultant's work was beyond reproach, 100%, I'm concerned. I get concerned about just the perception of fairness with the public about the process, that if you have money, you get results, and if you don't have money, you don't. And also that if we accept or require that kind of expenditure of money, we're putting pressure on ourselves. I would feel more pressure than, and as Jennifer said up front, some of these proposals are just ideas. They're not fleshed out. Cluster development is a perfect example. I researched cluster development and the history of Thurston County's efforts with cluster development, and I asked for staff briefings, and it is incredibly complex. And I guarantee you, staff could come forward with permutations of a cluster policy that I will not support. And they may be able to come up with one that I will. And I hope that they do. But I don't want the pressure to accept policy because we've charged the client, we've got an applicant that spent $20,000 on a consultant, and now I feel this horrible pressure to turn around and say, this just isn't a good policy for Thurston County. And they're going to turn around and go, you jerks, you made us pay all this money and let us down, false sense of that we were going to get this approved. And that's going to make it really hard on us to do our jobs for the community, for the broader good of Thurston County. So I'm very resistant to the idea of having that. Now, Lakeside Industries, my understanding, I don't know exactly how that all unfolded, it was before my time, but my understanding was there was very specialized science involved in the county's ability to move forward. And we got some input on that science, a science review that helped, again, a process that the county managed. We didn't just say, hey, tell us whether this is, we didn't just turn over the Thurston County code to a consultant, but it was a direct plug-in input on a very specialized technical issue that was not going to be able to be handled in any sort of expeditious way by the county. And I guess that made sense to the board at the time. So I would entertain those types of situations, but I'm a little concerned about creating, it seems like Commissioner Edwards, you're suggesting that we have sort of this process pathway, this short circuit to the finish line for people that have a lot of money. And that makes me really uncomfortable.
Well, I guess the only thing I can say on that is I'm looking for affordable housing, for an example. And as long as we have regulatory delay, or as long as we have, which is quite extensive, I don't think we're ever going to have affordable housing because we'll never have adequate housing. And so, especially when we have urban flight that's going on all over the country. I mean, things are going to change because of this virus and people working at home. And all I'm trying to do is accommodate. I don't want to short circuit the process at all when it comes to following the law as laid out in the Growth Management Act. But I'm told that these professionals follow it to a T better than we do. And I'm just looking for an option to try one out. This is not necessarily that option, but we don't seem to be willing to move forward very fast on anything. It's almost like a professional delay tactic, and that is not a slam to our staff. That's just the reality of them being overworked, and I'd like to be able to help them out, and we don't have a budget enough to do it. But if we develop enough business in our community and and retail and housing to accommodate and all that, I think we can have a very robust economy. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get our economic engine going. But I fully respect your position as well when we come to some of these more sensitive items. So thanks. That's good.
Josh, before that, I wanted to ask on the, I wanted to ask on another docket item since you've opened that up generally, but go ahead, Josh, if you have.
So two quick things and maybe a suggestion. So the first thing is in terms of the Lakeside, Chairman, sir, I think you got the facts on that exactly right in terms of the work that was done. And the reason that it went so quickly, Commissioner Edwards, was because of the prioritization from the board and what staff should be working on. So we're kind of saying the same thing over and over again, but what you guys tell us to do, we'll do in the order in which you tell us to do it. And I think it might be helpful, Jennifer, as a suggestion, commissioners, the last time we did this, we were all around a table and we kind of hashed out how best to kind of have all of our minds zeroing in on the same thing at the same time instead of just kind of cherry picking. I think since all of us have this printout, attachment B, I might suggest that we all pull out attachment B, and it might get right to Commissioner Edwards' question in terms of timing, because you'll see that some of the items that are right above the Barnett application are slated to be completed in Q1 of this year, which then brings the Barnett next up. So that would be my suggestion to the county manager and the board in terms of process, how we spend the next 50 minutes or so trying to make sure that the board has all the information they need on what's currently on the dockets, and then look at those green sheets to see if there's anything that you want to adjust on this that would push a green sheet onto this. That would be a suggestion.
Okay, well, let's just, I mean, it's the very first page in the binder is what Josh is talking about. It's got the projects in order with the estimated staff time. If you guys cleared 24 items by 2022, as it's laid out in this page, I think, we'd be rock stars to the community. So I'm very comfortable with that. But I guess you asked for specific questions on specific items, and I don't know if Commissioner Mejia has anything. I just had one. You've got in italics there, A23 rural water availability. It says placeholder, and there's nothing there, and I don't quite remember what that's about and how I should think about that when there's no time allotment there.
Right. We put that on the docket because we weren't sure if there would be rulemaking. Okay, so we had a briefing yesterday about the RIA process. Through that process, there's always the potential that ecology could have come up with rulemaking that would have had us adjusting our rules around well withdrawals or other items in order to implement those rules. That has not happened. We've been successful through our RIA updates, our RIA plans. And so we're on a good pathway to avoid that kind of rulemaking. But if something's not on the docket, we can't really work on it. So we put that in there as a placeholder. I don't anticipate we'll need to spend time on that unless something goes awry and we get new rules put into place by ecology that will require us to change something. So we wanted to be able to be ready to roll if that should happen. I don't see that happening right now with the pathway we're on our RIA plans.
Okay, so before we look at the new proposed items, do commissioners have any questions about existing items that might bear on their consideration of whether to incorporate any new items in terms of status or the amount of time involved or et cetera? Try to limit it to that focus, and then we'll move on to the new items. Commissioner Mejia or Edwards, anything?
Yes.
Go ahead, Gary.
Okay. I'm curious where the time frame would be, because I'm always talking about economic development, jobs, and in this case, water quality comes into play on a proposal by, I don't know the name of the proposal, but the gentleman's name was Webster down in Maytown area. So is this the time to bring that up? What my concern is about that, or is that coming up later?
That's coming up next. After we talk about existing projects, we can talk about that Webster application is one of our new applications we're going to cover right after this.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sounds like we're good to go on to the new proposed items.
Okay, and we can always come back to any of these if you think, oh yeah, I had a question about something.
Commissioner Mejia
I'm-
Commissioner Mejia
Oh.
has a question?
Oh, go ahead.
I do not. I was just wondering if we could take a quick 5-minute break.
Yes,
I know we're pressed with time, but
let's take 5. We'll be back in 20, 10, 16, 10, 11.
Good call, Commissioner.
Yes, I'm good. I'm with you.
Ready,
Okay,
sir?
we're
Go.
ready.
You're on.
All right, commissioners are back, staff is back, and we're picking right back up with the new proposed items. And back to Jennifer. You're muted.
I couldn't unmute. I'm so sorry. I'm going to take just a minute to go through these really quickly on attachment B, just so everybody is on the same page about the work we're doing now. And then I'm going to shift over to Maya to talk about the new proposals. But if you're following on attachment B, the community-driven review of, actually, I'll just go from the slide if that's easier for people because they're in a slightly different order. But community-driven review of agriculture is a big project we're working through with the Ag Committee right now. Commissioner Mejia has been attending some of those meetings, and that's going to take all year to get through. It's a pretty big ticket item, and it includes a review of all our agricultural lands. So I wanted to highlight that as one of the things we're working on. I've talked about our joint plans with the urban growth areas that we need to do with the cities. That's a big item. That takes a lot of coordination with the cities and actually joint planning commission meetings with city planning commissions. So it takes a lot of time to get through those processes. And the idea is to make sure that our development codes and our zoning and our urban growth areas are set up in a way so that when those lands are eventually annexed by the cities, that folks aren't thrown for a loop, that it's very predictable and that it can be a smooth transition for an urban growth area to become a city one day. Capital improvement plan or program is something we work on every year. And so that's coming to you at the end of the year as well. And then with a mid-year overview of it. And it's a major item that talks about all the facilities that all of our different departments are building and maintaining and working on for the next 6 years. Grand Mound sub-area plan, major rewrite from a very old plan. This is a really, to Commissioner Edwards' point about an economic engine, this is one of our economic engine areas in Thurston County. There's a lot of potential for more commercial activity there. We have a sewer water system in Grand Mound, and we have population growth that's happening in the Grand Mound area. So that's going to be a major lift as well. We have a land use amendment, a rezone request by an individual known as Upcastle. I believe that's the name of their company. It's on the border of Lewis County. They want to rezone to, I believe, a commercial industrial use from a rural residential use right now. It borders some commercial property in Lewis County, just to the south. We've talked about the Barnett Cluster Policy Amendment. And then on the Development Code docket, we briefed you last month on the Low Impact Development Code and how we're working with that. We hope to bring you proposals to look at for code changes there quite soon and wrap that up by Q3 of this year. The Shoreline Master Program is a major update. This is a 1990 piece of code and policy and land use designations that the ecology requires us to update, and we are trying to get through that right now. It's in Planning Commission review. They are taking their time and doing a very careful and thorough job of that update, and we are going to launch a major public outreach component to that this spring.
Jennifer, I have a question.
Yes.
In regards to the shoreline one.
Yes.
I don't see it on the attachment B.
Mm-hmm.
Is it there? Am I just missing it?
It is attachment B. It's under development code. Most of the Shoreline Master Program are actually development codes, regulations about what you can and can't do on the shoreline. It's toward the end. It says SMP/CAO code revisions.
Perfect.
It's down on the list of priority, but it's legally required. So we are on kind of legally established deadlines to do that update. So it's a major work program item for us right now.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. The Habitat Conservation Plan, you had a briefing on where we were with that yesterday. We're going to be working on the implementation ordinance for that whole new permitting process that we need to have ready to go once we get our incidental take permit from the services. So that's work that's being done as well this year. Our voluntary stewardship program has to do with an alternate path that existing and ongoing agriculture properties have to do what they need to do outside of the same restrictions that our critical area ordinance imposes on other properties. We want to update our codes around the voluntary stewardship program to make sure we're codifying those in the way that the state requires and implementing those places where ag has a little more flexibility than other land uses under our critical areas regulations. The wireless code, this has to do with an update to where and how we permit new wireless facilities, cell towers throughout Thurston County. This is stemming from a change in some federal regulations about how long we have to process a new permit for a new cell tower. And we have a consultant actually through the prosecuting attorney's office who has been working on some of this code work along with our own staff. This is a third party because it has a legal federal nexus that we wanted to make sure that we had that legal side covered. And that will be coming to you a little bit later in the year. It's going to the Planning Commission in about a month. Child care centers, you just did a hearing for. Boundary line adjustment standards. This is a little bit of a smaller project, but there have been some changes to state law about how we can allow boundary lines of our parcels to be adjusted and the process used for that. So that's being worked on a little bit later this year and may come to you toward the end of the year as a code update. I've talked about the placeholder for rural water availability, which is probably not a project we're going to need to work on this year. We have a pretty significant project to review our forest lands conversion ordinance and our tree protection ordinances. And this has a linkage to the climate mitigation plan that you just adopted as well. So making sure we have the right code language in place to protect tree cover in Thurston County is an important action of the climate mitigation plan and frankly of climate resiliency. Right now we're in the research phase for this, and this will be something that'll take probably quite some time and go into 2022 to bring to you. These are kind of big potential code changes that affect a lot of areas of the code. So we want to get it right and have some options for you on that. Reasonable use exceptions. This is, oh, go ahead.
On that point, I appreciate you saying that because I was going to make that point, and I also kind of feel the same way about the agricultural policy. Some of the, not 100%, but there's some overlap with climate resiliency and climate mitigation plan, and with the board's adoption, I wanted to make sure that analysis and that lens is being intertwined with what you guys are doing with the agricultural policy.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll make sure that we bring that lens to that project. That's important. I think we're still trying to figure out the climate mitigation plan, how it links to a lot of these projects. And there are some really good connections to a lot of the work you've already docketed. And I'm sure it will inspire some additional work in the future that you'll want to put on the docket. Reasonable use exceptions. This is a higher priority project that we're using a matrix team of staff to dig into. There's actually a meeting later this morning with that team. And this is about developing an administrative pathway for certain projects that right now have to go to a hearings examiner through our critical areas ordinance. And there might be options to save folks some time and money for appropriate projects to use kind of over-the-counter review or in-house staff review to get them where they need to go and still be in compliance with our critical areas ordinance. So that's a project we're working on. The JP2, JP3, JP4, that stands for joint plans, and there are zoning code updates we need to make. We manage multiple zoning codes for Thurston County. We have separate codes for the city of Lacey, city of Olympia, city of Tumwater, urban growth areas, and we need to, as those cities update their zoning codes, we need to follow along and make equivalent code updates for their urban growth area where they're appropriate. And that's a lengthy joint planning process, and that'll probably happen more in 2022. Oh, go ahead.
That's a really good point. So cities get to do their code. The county gets to do our code, plus all of the city's codes in the UGAs. So as we're trying to figure out how to make sure that those are all aligned, that's a big body of work that has sat on the shelf for about a decade. And so trying to align everything that's changed in the cities over the past 10 years is a big piece of work, and we're working it's an important one. I see Commissioner Edwards has a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner Evans.
When it comes to the municipalities that we're adjusting the UGA, does that fall on us financially and staff wise, or do they contribute some of that? I mean, they're asking us to upgrade that. That goes back to my old argument about there was never a phase 2 to the Growth Management Act, so that we would have funding to do a lot of this stuff. And when you say it's went on for years and years without attention, is that something that the municipalities would kick in and work with us or fund or whatever? Anyway, just a quick question on that.
So the cities contribute in kind, I would say, through our countywide planning policies. We do joint planning together. The cities lead the way with developing their the code changes that they feel are the highest priority and that they have adopted for their city codes that they would like to see adopted for the urban growth areas. They provide that information to us, but we do have staff planners who look through all of that and make sure it makes sense for county residents, and the board is actually the adopting authority on those. And so it's a joint process and it takes staff work on both sides. And the city does do a big part of that lift for us to bring us those proposals pretty well spelled out, but then we still have to take it through the process and our planning commission and our review and our adoption process. So there's work on both sides.
In regard to that, while we're moving forward, are they going to, or do they or we try to expand the urban growth area? Because this urban flight, if you will, is going to undoubtedly cause problems, and we want to do what we can as far as the consolidation issue. So who gets involved in that expansion of the UGAs?
We all do. So Thurston Regional Planning Council hosts an urban growth management subcommittee, which is made up of elected officials from different jurisdictions that are responsible for reviewing any proposals for expansion of an urban growth area boundary. The ability to expand an urban growth area boundary is very limited under the Growth Management Act, and you basically need to show your work that you've used up basically your buildable lands capacity to a certain point inside your existing urban growth boundary before you can expand it. We gather that data. Thurston Regional Planning Council gathers that data through its buildable lands report. They're coming out with an updated version of the buildable lands report soon. We're engaged in reviewing that information. Early reports show that we're actually in pretty good shape in terms of the amount of buildable lands we have in our urban growth areas. That doesn't mean folks won't ask. No one has asked in the cities to expand an urban growth area. In fact, there are a couple of places that folks have been talking about maybe it's a little bit too big here and there because of critical areas issues. There are some requests, though, on the table for Grand Mound, which is also an urban growth area. It doesn't have a city associated with it. It's sort of unique. It's a standalone urban growth area. You'll be looking at those proposals through the Grand Mound Sub-Area Plan update. There are a couple of proposals in there to expand that urban growth area in a couple places.
Just a time check, guys. It's 10:30 and we haven't heard anything about any of the new docket proposals.
Okay. Thank you.
One last one. You're familiar with the resorts and retreats and commercial smokehouses, the Peace Lutheran places of worship. It's called Peace Lutheran. That's the applicant. They wanted to adjust the development code in the city of Olympia, I believe, urban growth area, to look at making it easier to permit accessory uses to a place of worship, like seminary buildings or conference centers or things like that. So it's a permit streamlining request that we're working on. And with that, I think it's time to jump to the new proposals, and I'm going to let Maya start talking, so you have to hear me the whole time to go through.
Thanks, Jennifer. Maya People, Senior Planner with Community Planning and the lead on the Growth Management Services team. So I will go over the new proposals. We have 6 new proposals this year. 2 of those, the gray items at the bottom of this slide, are carryover proposals from the preliminary docket. So both of these gray items the board did not put on the official docket last year and just kept them on the preliminary docket for future consideration. And then the 4 new proposals are the green squares on top. 2 of those proposals are development code amendments, and 2 of them are comprehensive plan amendments. So we have Beaver Creek Land Use Amendment, the McDaniel Land Use Amendment. Those 2 are comp plan amendments. And then the 2 development code proposals are the Emergency Housing Ordinance and the Natural Landmark Program. So I will go over very briefly these carryover proposals on this slide, and then the next 4 slides, each one of these new green proposals will have its own slide, and we'll talk about each of them individually. The TDR PDR carryover item, the first gray box on this slide, was on the preliminary docket, and it is actually being considered through the community-driven ag review docket item right now. We are looking at our transfer of development rights proposals and purchase of development rights proposals. So there's nothing needed on this item. It's being reviewed with another docket item at this time. The resource use title notice for designated resource lands is another carryover item from the preliminary docket. And this item would consider code amendments to the Thurston County Code to require that a notice be filed with the title when the title is signed during the sale of a property for any property that is within a designated resource area, whether it be agriculture, forestry, or mineral lands. That covers a significant portion of the county. About 75% of the county falls in one of those resource areas. And if that docket item were added, staff would look into vehicles to implement that kind of a title notice, and also do stakeholder outreach to citizens and title companies and realtors that might be impacted by something like that. Any questions on the 2 carryover proposals before I move into the 4 new proposals? All right, Jennifer, you can click the slide. So the first new proposal I'm going to go over is the Beaver Creek Land Use Amendment, and this is Mr. Webster's application. So the owner of the property is the Beaver Creek Farm. I believe this may have previously been a dairy farm, and now it does pick Christmas trees. It is enrolled in the current use agriculture program with the assessor's office, the assessor's open space program, excuse me. And the applicant is requesting that the county amend the property, the land use and the zoning from rural residential resource 1 to 5 to rural resource industrial. So this map at the top right of this slide, there's a purple outline here with a star in the middle of it. And that shows the area that is being requested for a rezone. It's currently 1 to 5, a residential zoning, and they're requesting it be RRI, which is rural resource industrial. The neighboring property to the northeast is also rural resource industrial. That's that purple color. So it would be kind of a contiguous block of RRI in that area. The applicant states on their application that there is a depletion of the supply of industrial land, and that a lot of that area was in the Lacey Urban Grove area, and it's now been all used up. They note that there is a short supply, so that would be something that the county would investigate further with a rezone of this size. The site is 11 parcels, and it totals 389 acres in size. It's right next to the I-5 interchange at the Maytown and Case Road area. That's where the Farm Boy Drive-In is. And there is a creek through the property. Beaver Creek runs through this property and is an 11.4 mile river within the Chehalis watershed. There is coho within that stream. I believe it's used for spawning according to Department of Fish and Wildlife's salmonscape system. So just to talk a little bit about what would be looked into with this proposal, there is state law, countywide planning policies, and comprehensive plan policies around siting industrial uses in the rural county. And with a rezone of this size for industrial in the rural county, those are all policies that we would look into if this item were docketed. Typically, the policies in the comp plan and in state laws state that industrial uses in the rural area should be intended to serve the existing and projected rural population. Typically, they are dependent on natural resources, but there are some exceptions where there may be rural resource industrial areas that are not dependent on natural resources. And state law suggests that most industrial resources should be primarily located in the urban growth areas. So if there is a shortage of space in the urban growth areas that warrants that there is a need for that to be sited in the rural county, that would need to be investigated. This is a project that has the potential to require significant staff time beyond the assessed fee. It would require some scoping up front and some discussion with the applicant on their intent because of the limitations under state law. So any questions on Mr. Webster's application for a land use amendment and rezone to industrial? Yes, Commissioner Edwards.
Sounds like he has his hand up.
I couldn't hear you, Ty. What was that?
I saw, I'm recognizing your hand up there.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now on this particular one, the way it's been explained to me is it's going to be good for jobs and good for the environment. And so those two things a lot of times don't go well together. And you mentioned it's going to take a lot of staff work. Is this one that we could somehow, I don't know, get some of the work done? And I don't know what that work is, but if the applicant was willing to participate at that level, is this something that makes sense to do that? I mean, boy, it'd be kind of neat if we were able to protect water quality, maybe have a fish hatchery at the same location and create jobs. And the location is so great right there, right next to the freeway. So you don't oftentimes come up with things that kind of look like that in the first blush. And maybe I'm wrong, but I guess we won't know until it gets explored a little bit. So I'll just let it go with that.
So the first step would be for the board to add it to the official docket, and then we could discuss about the process to move this item forward. You're correct that I did say that this item has the potential to require significant staff time and some additional research. If it's determined that there's research needed that's beyond the in-house expertise, there may be an opportunity to do some sort of a contract similar to how we proceeded with Lakeside. In particular, determining if there is a need for industrial lands and we don't have that availability within the urban growth area. That would be part of the study that we would have to look at if this item were docketed. So.
Okay.
Is this one where you, are these new proposals, are you giving them a staffing estimate like we have on the attachment B, just so we can have a sense of how big of an item this is compared to Shoreline Master or Barnett Cluster, et cetera?
Yeah, I don't believe we provided staff estimates on the new docket items.
Well, Maya, let me just pop in. We give a range. So if you look in your binder, this particular item is on page 19 of 62 under tab 1. And on the back page of the project sheet, we give a staff resource need, high, medium, or low. And this one's high, 0.5 or more staff to process this through. This type of a major rezone in the rural area will draw a lot of public comment. That often takes a lot of the staff time in addition to the research. But there will be likely a lot of interest in this. And anytime you have a high level of community interest, you're going to get a high level of staff time needed. And while the application proposes kind of a warehouse distribution facility, large buildings to be sited on this site, we have to analyze this proposal for any potential use under the Rural Resource Industrial District, which is a long list of uses. And we'd have to look at the compatibility of those uses with the surrounding area and natural resources and the like. So it's a significant change to go from rural residence, rural resource to rural resource industrial. So that's why the staff estimate is on the high side for this.
Thank you.
I think Commissioner Mejia had her hand up.
Jennifer answered it. I just had a question regarding how they knew about the public interest, but she answered that for me.
Okay, let's go on to our next, please.
Thanks for clarifying that, Jennifer. So our next citizen application is the McDaniel Land Use Amendment property. There are two owners on this property, the McDaniels and the Foresters, and it's one parcel that's roughly 12 acres in size. You can see this purple box here. It does have two zones on the property. A portion of the property is zoned medium density, and then the other portion of the property is zoned low density, 0 to 4. And the landowner wants to put a single family home on the property, but due to critical areas on the property, the only developable area is the area that is currently zoned as medium density, which is this small orange block in the top portion of the square. And that has a minimum density requirement of 4 units per acre. So they can't put their single family home in that area unless it's rezoned. This area, this parcel is located within the Lacey urban growth area. So I do want to note that there is an opportunity for the board to roll this item in to the Lacey joint plan update. And what does rolling it in mean? The Lacey UGA joint plan is already on the docket. So if the board decides they want to roll the item in, it wouldn't require a docket comment period. It would just be a managerial decision to fold this into that joint plan update. A direction from the board. That would absolve fees to the landowner, but it would process this item concurrently with the Lacey UGA joint plan. And that means that there could be a little bit more of a timeline for it, since the joint plan is a big project and it's likely going to go until later this year, potentially 2022. Questions on this item before we move forward?
Just kind of clarify that timeline a little bit. They're on the preliminary docket, or this stage, they're not even moving at all. So if they're on the Lacey joint plan, that's still a quicker timeline than currently.
Okay.
So moving to the next item. This is the emergency housing ordinance. So some of the commissioners may recall this as a docket item from last year, and it was voted to be removed altogether. However, Commissioner Menser did express interest in a December briefing, I believe, with maybe the comprehensive plan, in seeing this return as a proposal. So staff has put it on the preliminary docket at this time. Currently, the county has an interim ordinance in place, and that interim ordinance must be renewed every 6 months, otherwise it expires. It requires staff time to renew that ordinance. We are required to have a public comment period and also a public hearing before the board, and then develop an ordinance and bring that forth for adoption every 6 months. This proposal would consider making those interim regulations permanent, and it would require review by the Planning Commission. So there is a little bit of added process in addition to a board review process, again, for transparency for the public. And that would eliminate, if permanent regulations are adopted, needing to bring back an interim ordinance every 6 months.
So let me just pipe this in there. And I guess my intent on proposing this was not to add staff, was to save staff time in the long run, because we were, just for Commissioner Mejia's benefit, the board was very split on this. Commissioner Edwards didn't want to have it at all, even on an interim basis. I wanted to have it on a permanent basis, so we didn't, and Commissioner Hutchings wanted to just keep it interim and have it every 6 months we would reconsider it. But there's a public process involved in that. Now, it's not a planning commission, but I was hopeful that if a majority of the board wanted the interim ordinance, it would save staff having to come back every 6 months, rather than having it, the way Commissioner Hutchings basically had it ran. So I guess my question for staff is, if we do it this way, if the majority of the board agreed to do it this way, is this saving you time or costing you time in the long run?
It does cost a little bit more time up front to process it through the Planning Commission, but it does save staff time on the interim renewal. Staff does incur quite a bit of time to go through that process every 6 months. And, 6 months is about our shortest time frame for any sort of a code amendment. So this is a repetitive, onerous process.
And what this, and just this was kind of complicated, but what this ordinance does on an interim basis is give us a toolbox for a mitigation site or a temporary homeless camp outside the urban area. It basically reduces some of the requirements that would be required. Like the requirements previously were so onerous that you'd never be able to have a camp. Essentially, you had to have people, certain number of people limited, and certain amount of stay, and building code, blah blah blah. So we gave ourselves the option to do this. We haven't done it yet, but the question was whether it should be a tool in the toolbox, and then the second question was, should we always have that tool in the toolbox, or should we just keep kicking this temporary toolbox every 6 months down the road? So that's kind of where that issue is about. Commissioner Edwards has his hand up. Go ahead, Commissioner Edwards.
Okay, I'm on. My concern all along has been that rural, unincorporated Thurston County is very concerned that this is going to shift a problem from the urban core, and specifically the Olympia area, although it's pretty prevalent in Lacey now as well, from the municipal situation and problem to deal with. And it's going to switch it over to the county to have to deal with. And when I say deal with, that could be a lot of different areas. I mean, law enforcement is one of the big ones. But my objection and why I wanted to keep it on a temporary basis is I've never seen a solution by the municipalities to this particular topic. I mean, they keep throwing money at it, but nothing seems to get accomplished other than that more and more homeless folks are encouraged to come to, say, downtown Olympia, because they get to live a deviant lifestyle and move forward with being uninhibited, I guess, in their lifestyle, and no consequences for the situation they're in. And many of them have made a life choice decision, and many of them need mental health and substance abuse issues addressed to them. So I just haven't seen a good solution, and that's kind of why I'm trying to keep it as temporary. It still gives an option, but not a permanent solution to an option that doesn't fit in the unincorporated area of Thurston County, where I feel the services and such that are needed just are not available in these. I don't want to hide the problem out in rural America, so to speak. That's kind of where I'm at on that. So that's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to the next one.
So the last citizen initiated amendment we have is for a development code amendment to incorporate a natural landmark program, and the applicant is Lawrence Jacobson on this. So the request is to add a new chapter to the Thurston County Code that would preserve natural areas by creating a registry of properties that landowners wish to preserve. Completely voluntary with minimal cost to the landowner. And if this item were docketed, staff would investigate what the ongoing costs would be to the county to administer that kind of a program, what the county's role and obligation would be to monitor properties that are enrolled. And we would also review the open space tax program to see if it does or could cover something similar to a natural landmark program.
I think you're going to get to this, Maya, but I'm just going to ask now. When the board, as it's been presented in the past, we always have three options. One is to docket something. One is to kind of keep it in the preliminary docket, kind of in limbo for the future. And the other is to just say, no, that's not going to go on the docket. So if we were to choose that middle course for any of these items, or let's say all of the items, does that require the public hearing or process to just even keep them on the preliminary docket, or is that only if we place them onto that top category of the official docket?
So to maintain items on the preliminary docket would automatically happen if the board moves forward with option one. So they're on the preliminary docket right now. If the board directs staff to continue with the priorities and the docketed items that were already set in April 2020, all of these new items would remain on the preliminary for the board's future consideration and brought back in 2022.
Okay, Commissioner Edwards has his hand up.
Yes, I guess my question is this sensitive areas or is it historic areas?
The applicant states that this would be natural areas, so it's not specific in what that means, but it could mean if you have critical areas on a property or you have some sort of a natural environment that's unique. And that would need to be fleshed out a little bit more if this item were officially docketed.
And I guess to follow up on that, if it doesn't denote which one it is, don't we have something in place for, say, sensitive areas? And I'd like to see something utilized that we could buy development rights from property owners that have sensitive areas that could, say, spill over as a problem later on. And I'll just use something Commissioner Menser brought up the other day, the new thing about tires degrading and such. So maybe we want to be more cautious about areas where we've got water and how that water might be dispersed. So I'm just wondering how much it's going to take to kind of figure that out. If it was history, for an example, I'd want the historical committee to kind of review it and see what they thought about it. But if it's all sensitive areas, do we have something in place already that addresses some of those same concerns?
We have Commissioner. Oh, sorry.
No, that's it. I'm done. Good. Sorry.
Commissioner Edwards, the county does have a conservation futures program. So you get applications through that program each year, which is a program where the county funds the purchase of properties or development rights, usually by land trusts or other nonprofits. But we fund those projects to do just this, to preserve significant natural areas that are otherwise subject to maybe development or other uses. So that's one tool in our toolbox that we have. The open space tax program is something that you run where properties with significant environmental resource values can apply for a tax reduction to maintain their properties in an open space natural state. There are criteria, of course, for that program. So we'd have to kind of, like Maya said, compare how that lines up with something like this. This would be a new tool to that existing toolbox, which would be a new category of designation that we would apply to properties, or that could be voluntarily asked for by applicants, where they would be, I think the idea is to prevent these properties from developing in perpetuity. And it would take significant work. It's creating a new section of our code. I believe there are examples from other places in the country potentially that we could look to, but we gave it a medium staff time. I think it's medium to high in terms of the level of effort, but it would just be adding a new tool and a new way to preserve natural areas to our existing toolbox.
I guess to follow up on that, I'll just use as an example. Ken Lake, as a community, had a concern with, I don't know, I think it was 17 acres or something like that. And they put it into one of the existing programs. I just hate to go to a lot of work for you folks, especially, to develop some new code issues that possibly we could do just by adjusting maybe a current code to deal with whatever is being proposed. Because I guess I don't have a good sense of what the person bringing this forward is trying to accomplish that we couldn't accomplish with our existing code.
So Mr. Jacobson is in my district, and he's been working with my assistant the whole 2 years I've been in office. and he's been working with commissioners before me, trying to just preserve a small area of land, I think in memory of his mother, if I remember correctly. And I haven't gotten too deep into the weeds, but my assistant's been working on this, and we haven't been able to find a pathway for him to accomplish what he's trying to accomplish under current codes. And again, I don't know the ins and outs of it, but and I didn't direct him to do it this way, but this is apparently a pathway that he's seeking to try to create, because we haven't been able to find anything better for him as things exist now. I think is where this comes from. It's a fairly small piece of land, but he would like to just preserve it in memory of one of his family members, and he just can't seem to find the right legal mechanism to do it in terms of who would be responsible for managing it and handling it. So it's something to look at. I think that's the idea though.
Oh, okay. I mean, I'm definitely in favor of preserving if we can do that. I'm just hesitant to move into a whole nother process. So I guess I need to be made a little more aware.
Commissioner Mejia has had her hand up for a while.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
it's
sorry.
okay.
I thought I was answering. Okay. I'll be quiet.
So my question is in relation to the proposals that we either need to add to the 2020, 2021 official docket, or maintain it in the 2022, or remove it. Are we considering 6 or 5, since the transfer of development rights and purchase of development rights is being considered with the agricultural docket item?
I think you're considering 5. I don't think you need to add the TDR one to the docket. It's being addressed. So you're looking at the 4 new ones to this year, and then the carryover resource use notice proposal to make a decision on those. And you don't have to make a package decision. You can pick and choose that you want to explore adding 1 or 2 or whatever items to the docket. And then that would trigger a 20-day written comment period. The one difference is that for that McDaniel proposal in the Lacey urban growth area, we wouldn't have to hold that 20-day comment period if you directed staff to simply roll that into the Lacey urban growth area update, which would save that applicant money as well. So
would it increase the timeline or staff time to the Lacey UGA if that were to be carried over?
Not significantly. It's a fairly minor rezone proposal, as you saw. And so since we're already going to be going through the lengthy process that was spelled out earlier to have planning commission review, joint planning commission review with Lacey, and all of that work, it's a pretty minor addition. It would not incur a lot of significant staff time addition.
Thank you.
So bottom line here, because we're actually at 11, do you need to know exactly which ones the board is interested in adding, if any, or do you just need to know whether something's going to be added or nothing's going to be added?
So, Commissioner, if I may, I'll bring this item for your consideration on Tuesday, and the decision-making process will be in a couple of steps. First, I will ask the board whether they'd like to go with option 1 or option 2. Within option 2, then depending how the board would like to proceed, then that will be the end of the exercise in a way, and all the proposals will be part of the preliminary docket, and it will bring back to you in 2022 for reconsideration. If the board moves into option 2, then the next steps will be what items you would like to include as part of the new proposals that you have. So, and that's what probably my suggestion to you, to have that decision-making process be on next Tuesday morning. And I will begin with asking you what option you'd like to go, option 1, option 2. And again, if the board moves to option 2, then what of those items you would like to include under option 2?
So when will this next hearing be, Ramiro?
I'm sorry, come again?
When will it be?
Next Tuesday morning during,
Next Tuesday.
during agenda setting.
Okay, well then it sounds like we're where we need to be for today. Jennifer, do you think we are ready to adjourn?
I think we've covered everything we could hope to cover today. You have your binders, you have your reference material. So if you're thinking about this over the next several days before Tuesday, you can look at all of that. If you have any specific questions, staff is available to help answer them as well.
Okay, great. That sounds good. Then we're going to adjourn this meeting. The board will move into an executive session. Is that a different Zoom, Ramiro?
Yeah, different Zoom.
Okay, we'll pick that up in about 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, guys. Good job.